The problem with side opposition was that they focused too much on the short term, telling us all the harms that austerity will bring, ignoring the horrifying long-term consequences of their actions. We gave you clear analysis telling you about things such as long-term structural reform and how austerity will bring these things and stabilize the economy. Whereas they simply said, let's just default, or let's just use fiscal stimulus packages, but that means in the long run, another crisis will happen again. Why? Because the government did not take these harsh austerity measures, did not undertake these long-term structural reforms. And bearing this framework in mind, two clashes for the House today. Which side is best for the social cohesion of the country? Which side is best for the economy of the country? And here they told us, right from their first sentence, all of the social consequences of austerity. My first speaker already rebutted this by telling you how it's actually mitigated in the first place. Now, governments will go after your rich corporations first. They will first do things such as privatization of inefficient state-owned enterprises. Then they'll go after the high income, increasing income tax, increasing taxes on the luxury goods, and only at the end will they actually go after the low-income group. Let me give you a concrete example. Greece implemented 7 austerity packages. The first 4 austerity packages only targeted rich civil servants and increases taxes on imported cars. Only after that did they target the low-income group. Why? Because the first 4 packages were not implemented properly. But we also told you that on the comparative, it will be far worse on their side. Why? Because if you abandon austerity measures, no country will give you loans. And this means you default on your debts. And they told us we never showed you why this is bad. Let me tell you why this is bad. When a government defaults on the debts, they will face rapidly rising inflation, currency depreciation, and huge unemployment. And what this doesn't mean for the people on the ground. Now the value of your savings will evaporate overnight. Your money will be stuck in the banks. Businesses that rely on exports for their profits will simply collapse. And we actually saw this happening in Argentina recently, didn't we? When Argentina defaulted on its debt recently, the peso depreciated by 30%. Inflation rose to 50% overnight, harming the people on the ground. Then let's look at it specifically, right? They told us things such as loss of welfare benefits. And you tell me that was the problem, right? Governments are spending exorbitantly on welfare benefits, and this meant huge budget deficits, and this led to a debt crisis. On the comparative, what we're telling you, when you implement austerity measures, you can cut off all of this exorbitant spending, you can ensure that governments divert their resources towards more better things such as training and apprenticeship programs. Yet, the social safety nets for the most vulnerable in society, such as the disabled or those who are in extreme poverty, remain intact. And then they also told us this whole idea about brain drain, right? But this should happen more on their side of the house. Why? Because then the people know that the government is not undertaking long-term structural reforms. Therefore, 10 years down the line, another crisis will happen again. And therefore, they will migrate to a safer country because they're scared. They do not want to lose to another crisis yet again. And then the speaker brought up this point about crime, right? How she said that, the first thing that we turn to is crime. We do not have enough money to feed our children. No, the first thing we'll do is turn towards things such as training programs or apprenticeship programs so that we can upgrade our skills and therefore get a better job. On the comparative, is their side where crime will increase. Why? Because when the government defaults on its debts, when your value of the savings evaporates overnight, when there's huge bank runs and investors put money out of the economy, that is when the economic conditions become worse, and that is when the crime rate increases. Second question on the house today, which side is actually best for the economy of the country? And here they try to tell us all of these kind of fancy economic terms. How do we use fiscal stimulus and boost short-term economic growth? Let me tell you the problem. We agreed that under austerity, economic growth in the short term is hampered. But we told you that through the process of austerity, long-term structural reforms in the form of privatization or training programs undertake. So therefore, 10 years down the line, another crisis will not happen again. That is what our side is standing for. Let me give you concrete examples. After Greece implemented austerity, they jumped 97 places in indexes such as the Ease of Starting Business Index for the World Bank. Their GDP is also projected to grow by 3.4%. So this shows that even if economic growth is hampered in the short term, it does not last for very long. After a few years, if you implement austerity properly, your economic growth will increase. On the comparative, when you use things such as fiscal stimulus, what happens now? Your fiscal budget deficit widens, and this means now your investors lose confidence in your economy because they see there's a huge fiscal budget deficit, and therefore another crisis will happen somewhere down the line, and therefore that is when they start to pull money out of your economy. So they simply cannot keep focusing on the short term and ignore the severe long-term consequences of their actions. Then they also told us in the third substantive, it's an interesting point, that look, why don't we just default and therefore our debt will be restructured and things like that. Number one, I've already shown you that when a government defaults on its debt, it immensely harms the people people on the ground. And let's look at what they mean by restructuring of debt. When they say restructuring of debt when a country defaults, what they're essentially saying is that all of the investors, all of your creditors should be forgive your debt, say that okay, you're going to forgive 50% or 60% of your debt even though because you're defaulted. And what does this mean? In the long term, no one will loan you money again because they know that the first thing you resort to if you cannot pay back your loans is simply default, and therefore you do not care about paying back the 50% debt. Again, we saw this happening in Argentina, where the majority of creditors said, okay, we'll forgive your debt, only a few virtual investors actually held out, and that's why they defaulted, right? So they simply can't keep telling us, well, default is the best option. But let me contextualize it in Europe even further, right? Because countries such as Germany or Finland, the people who are actually giving you the loans, they need to justify the loans they're giving to their parliament, right? So they cannot justify the loans they're giving to their parliament, and their parliament will tell them, no, I'm sorry, you cannot give a loan to Greece because the first thing they'll do is default. And this means now Greece will not receive any loans, they will default on the debt, immensely harming the people on the ground. Let me give you a further line of analysis. This whole principle of moral hazard, right? Because now Greece committed mistakes. Yet, you're forgiving them, you're bailing them out. So what's to prevent them from doing the same thing 10 years down the line, harming many more generations in the process? On the comparative, they're saying, yes, things unfortunately are not the best for this generation, but we're protecting the thousands of generations that are going to come after this. Then they also told us things such as, oh, let's increase financial regulation and equality for everyone within society. And we tell you, this is something that we want on our side too. And here's why their side will do it even worse. Because on their side of the house, because the countries keep getting bailed out without having to implement austerity measures, they have no incentive to strengthen financial regulation on banks. And therefore, 5 or 10 years down the line, another crisis will happen again because they did not strengthen financial regulation. Then we also told you, right from our first substantive, this whole idea of irresponsible government spending. And this is something that we never tackled at all. And let me tell you why this is important. Because now under their side, governments will continue spending irresponsibly on vanity projects, they'll continue spending on huge welfare benefit programs, and therefore another crisis will happen down the line. And as second substantive, we told you how austerity measures actually boost investor confidence. And again, this is something that they completely drop. And let me again tell you why this is important. Because under austerity measures, the governments are committing to paying their debts and undertaking long-term structural reforms. And therefore, investors will see that this economy has huge potential for growth, and therefore they start investing in the economy. Again, let me give you a concrete example. Greece, after they implemented austerity measures, they eventually were more successful in issuing a short-term bond after 4 years. On the comparative, what happens is if you abandon austerity measures, investors will pull their money out of the economy because they're scared. In the short term, you might default on your debt. Even if you do not default, in the long term, they know another crisis will happen again in the future because your government did not implement austerity measures, and therefore they start pulling money out of the economy. And because we showed you, we are best for the social cohesion of the country, and we are best for the economy in the long term, protecting generations in the process, we win today's debate.